Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Darkest Corners. Today's tales are of the American wilderness. Please enjoy.
The skinwalker on the Montana ranch. The sky over eastern Montana stretched wide and endless, fading from soft purple into the bruised black of night. Out there, miles from the nearest highway, the Collins family ranch sat in near silence. It was late autumn, the cattle huddled closer to the barns, the grass brittle and dry beneath the cold wind that swept across the plains. For generations, the Collins family had worked this land, and though it was lonely, they always said the silence had a kind of peace. But in the fall of 1998, that silence was broken by something none of them could explain or forget. The first night. Jake Collins, the eldest son, was the first to notice something wrong. He had been checking the fencing after sundown, lantern in hand, when he heard the cattle bawling in panic. Their cries carried across the field, sharp and frantic. At first he thought wolves had come down from the hills, but when he reached the edge of the herd, he saw no predators. The animals were gathered tight, eyes wide, nostrils flaring, their bodies trembling as if something invisible moved among them. That's when Jake heard it. A voice. Not a growl, not a howl, just a voice. It was faint, carried by the wind, and it was calling his name. Jaka, Jaka. The sound came from the tree line about 50 yards away, where the lantern light didn't quite reach. He froze, his hand tightening on the wooden handle. Whoever it was, they knew him. "Who's out there?" Jake called, his voice cracking against the silence. The reply came instantly, but it wasn't right. The voice repeated his name again, but warped this time, dragging out the syllables in a way no human throat should be able to manage. He backed away, the cattle surging restlessly behind him, and didn't stop moving until he was back at the house. He told his father, Dale, who dismissed it as coyotes or pranksters. But Jake swore what he heard was no animal, no person he'd ever known. The footprints. The next morning, Dale went out early to check for signs of predators. The frost still clung to the grass, and that's when he found them, tracks circling the barn. But they weren't wolf prints. They weren't even human. The tracks looked wrong, like elongated hands pressed into the dirt, the fingers too long, too narrow, twisted as though whatever left them wasn't used to walking on two legs. They stretched from the tree line to the barn, then disappeared as if the thing had leapt onto the roof. When Dale climbed a ladder to check the shingles, he found scratches gouged deep into the wood, long marks that tore through the surface like claws. That night, he told his wife not to let the kids outside after dark. Voices in the dark. The following nights only grew worse. They heard knocking on the windows when no one was outside. They heard footsteps on the porch, heavy and dragging, as though something was circling the house. Sometimes, in the dead of night, the family heard voices calling from outside. Familiar voices. One night, Jake heard his mother's voice outside his window, whispering his name. But when he checked, his mother was asleep in her bed. Another night, Dale swore he heard his late brother calling for him from the pasture. The voice was identical, right down to the tone, the laugh at the end of his words. But Dale knew better. His brother had been dead for years, the shape in the pasture. The incident that finally broke them happened 2 weeks later. Jake was up late again, restless, when he saw movement near the far fence line. He grabbed the rifle, thinking maybe it was cattle breaking loose. But when he peered through the moonlight, he froze. Something stood there in the field. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were bent at angles that didn't look natural. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, and the skin on its chest and face looked stretched, thin, as though it didn't quite fit. Even from a distance he could see its eyes reflecting the moonlight. Yellow, glowing, not like an animal's but sharp and aware. It tilted its head back and made a sound, not quite a howl, not quite a laugh. A broken mimicry of a man's voice. Then it began moving toward the house, loping on all fours before rising up on its hind legs. Jake fired a shot, but the figure didn't flinch. Instead, it stopped, crouched low, and called out in his own voice. "Jake, "Don't shoot, it's me." He dropped the rifle in terror. The voice was perfect. The final night. Dale gathered the family and locked every door. They sat together in the living room, guns at the ready, the lamps turned low. Outside, the thing prowled. They heard it dragging its fingers along the walls, knocking, scratching, circling. At times, it sounded like it was on the roof. At other times, it pressed against the windows, its breath fogging the glass. All night, it called to them, sometimes in the voices of neighbors, sometimes in the voices of family. At one point, Jake swore he heard his own voice calling from the back porch. It never stopped until dawn. When the sun rose, the noises ceased. The tracks outside led back into the trees, and the Collins family swore they saw a figure disappearing into the pines, moving fast, too fast for any man. Within the week, the Collins family packed up and abandoned the ranch. They sold the property to an out-of-state buyer who didn't know the story. But in the small towns nearby, the locals still whisper about it. They say something old, something that doesn't belong, still walks those fields at night. And if you listen close, on the right kind of evening, you might hear it, calling your name. The lights in Black Hollow Forest. They say Black Hollow Forest is older than any town that borders it. The trees stand unnaturally tall, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their roots clawing out of the soil like bones breaking through skin. Hunters used to venture there, but not anymore. Too many stories, too many people who never came back. But I didn't believe any of it, at least not until last October. The first lights. I'd been camping with two friends, Evan and Maria, not far from the hollow's edge. We wanted to get away from the noise of the city, spend a weekend under the stars. The first night was quiet, uneventful. But on the second night, as the fire burned low, we saw them. Lights. At first, I thought it was just someone else out in the woods. They flickered faintly between the trees, glowing a pale blue, then vanishing, only to reappear deeper in the forest. They didn't move like flashlights, they drifted. Slow, floating orbs of light, silent against the dark. Evan thought it was swamp gas or some natural phenomenon. Maria insisted it looked like lanterns. Against our better judgment, curiosity pulled us closer. That's when we heard it. Faint, distant laughter. Not joyous laughter, but something hollow. It carried through the trees in a way that made the hair on my neck rise. The noises. We followed the lights for maybe 100 yards before realizing we were no longer anywhere near camp. The firelight was gone, replaced by shadows pressing in tight. The laughter faded, replaced by something worse. Whispers. They weren't clear, but they were many. Dozens of voices, muttering in unison. Sometimes they sounded right beside us, other times far away. The forest seemed alive with them. And then came the knocking. It started as a single sharp rap on a tree trunk, then another from deeper in the woods, then another closer. The knocks echoed around us in some deliberate pattern, like something moving just out of sight, circling. Maria grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. Evan called out, thinking maybe we were being messed with by other campers. But the voices didn't stop. The whispers seemed to respond, repeating his words back to him, distorted, broken, like a recording warped by static. The figures. We should have turned back, but the lights kept leading us. They hovered just far enough away that we thought we could catch up, only for them to glide further. Finally, we reached a small clearing. That's when we saw them. Not the lights, figures. At the far end of the clearing stood three shapes, barely visible, darker than the night itself. Their outlines flickered, as though they weren't solid. Above each of them hovered one of the lights, glowing pale blue and humming faintly. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, like hundreds of voices speaking at once, rising in a strange rhythm. And then, all at once, silence. The figures tilted their heads toward us. The sound of branches snapping filled the clearing as they stepped closer. That's when Maria screamed. The escape. We bolted. We didn't care where we were going. We just ran. The forest seemed endless, the lights chasing after us, darting from tree to tree. Every few steps, I heard the knocking again, always ahead, as though the forest itself was trying to hurt us deeper. Somehow, by sheer luck, we stumbled back into camp. Our fire had burned out, but our tents were still there. We didn't stop to gather anything. We just grabbed what we could and ran for the truck. As we pulled out of the dirt road, I glanced back one last time. The lights were there, hovering at the tree line, watching. And just before they vanished, I swear I saw one of the figures step into the open. Its body was stretched, too thin, its arms too long, its face a blur of shadow with two burning eyes. Aftermath. We never went back for our gear. The next morning, when we returned with a sheriff's deputy, there was no trace of the tents, no footprints, no campfire, no sign we had ever been there at all. But the deputy didn't seem surprised. He just said, "Folks see things in Black Hollow. Best thing you can do is forget it." Forget it? How could I? Every night since, I've heard faint knocking outside my window, and sometimes, when I wake up too suddenly in the dark, I see a pale blue light hovering in the corner of my room. And I know, sooner or later, the whispers will start again.
Hey my friends, I'm here to say if you can please like and subscribe. I really want to grow this channel, and I enjoy making these videos, but without your support, I can't continue. Thank you.